question comes from Ethan, and it's a long one. I hear so many people trying to decide on the quality of things related to other things. Quote, which idea is better? Which method is better? Which band is better? It is difficult to suppress these questions, both from within and from without. What can be done to mitigate the urge to hierarchize things in this way? Or do you think it is a harmless tendency of humanity? So the question immediately falls victim to the same tendency that it's trying to mitigate. If hierarchizing is better, then there's no need to mitigate it. But only if hierarchizing is worse, is there a need to mitigate it. So what can be done to mitigate it is, well, we could refrain from assuming that we need to mitigate it to begin with, because then we wouldn't be hierarchizing. We need to decide when it's better to hierarchize and when it's better to refrain from doing so. We need to hierarchize that first, and then we can ask the question, well, when is it bad to be hierarchizing things? And in that case, there's plenty of examples to examine. One example that seems to me like a bad example of hierarchizing in our culture is the fact that all members of the United States Supreme Court are graduates of either Harvard or Yale Law School. And our culture thinks that Harvard or Yale are just like the best. They're so great. You know, there's no way we can question the majesty of Harvard and Yale. And I think that's a very bad thing for the Supreme Court, to have so little faith in any other law school, because I think in actual fact, I don't think the law schools are really that much different from each other, and what we should be focusing on is the person and not the school. Another area where the question of what is the best is interesting is in sports, of course, because a lot of sports, you know, they rely on like individual players, but I think also the ability of teams to work together is probably an important factor, that if you narrow your focus and you determine what the best is in too narrow a place, like, oh yeah, we got the best player, but then if you don't have the best team, then you could be worse off. We can see a reflection of the ideas of hierarchy in nature, where males in social species fight to be on the top, and then the one at the top gets all the girls. And so it's possible that when we think about what is better than the other, we overvalue the thing that we've decided is better, because historically the top dog or gorilla got all the mates. If you win the Oscar for Best Picture, then you're going to get a ton of acclaim. It's not winner takes all, but it's winner takes most. There is a big difference between what wins the Oscar and what was merely nominated. There's also, you know, a difference between what was nominated and what wasn't nominated. So the same principle applies there. But I do think it is a little bit of a fallacy to assume that ranking things is bad. Because when you talk about what is better, there are different contexts in which you can talk about it. You can talk about it in absolute terms, as if you're literally trying to determine God's opinion on the matter. And in that case, it's sort of like eternal damnation for that which is not the best. This is not the most practical way to approach most situations. But there's another way of determining better, which is much more useful. Which is better for me, for us, now? This doesn't talk about eternity. This talks about utility. There's like a principle in economics that the value of a given item can be different from one day to the next, because it's worth different amounts to a person depending on the moment at which they're considering buying it. This kind of flexibility in prices occurs naturally if you just let people do what they want to do. the value of a given thing can change. So you really want to adjust the level at which you're determining what thing is better, depending on how you want to categorize it. It's better to not be a mass shooter than to be a mass shooter. I don't think you need to mitigate that one. It's almost like an absolute. So the question was like, the criticism is which idea is better, which method is better, which band is better. Sometimes it's not a problem to determine which one's better for the given moment. If I want to listen to U2, the band, right now, then that's better right now. And that's a very effective way of living, to believe in hierarchy per moment. The way this question was asked made me wonder if the questioner, it made me think about psychological types. In Jungian typology, every person has a dominant function, one of 8 possible dominant functions. All the functions are set up on a polarity such that each one has sort of a demonic opposite. These words that describe the functions were a valuable contribution of the people at Personality Hacker podcast and website and company. They were insightful enough to realize that these 8 words could be applied to the Jungian functions, so that you no longer had to use like FI or introverted feeling. Yeah. So anyway, so whatever function anyone uses will have the opposite function as, I have a new name for it, I'm calling it the infernal function, which invokes Dante's Inferno. To gain access to your infernal function is the equivalent of going on a journey through Dante's Inferno, an enormously difficult thing to do. I was thinking about how somebody who uses introverted feeling or authenticity as their primary function will tend to be disappointed at people who use effectiveness as their primary function. So the infernal function of authenticity is extroverted thinking, which is effectiveness. Now, effectiveness is most useful in predictable situations where you have to take commodities and act on them in the most effective way. And so there's an implicit abandonment of the authenticity of the sort of internal natural being of the thing in favor of looking at it in a sort of useful way, like how is it to be used? And so I want the best thing, and that is the best thing, and so we're going to use that, and we're going to multiply it. This one rambled a bit, but it was a hard question, and it implied a value judgment that it was actually explicitly against. Anyway, thanks for... I'll see you next week. Hopefully with a slightly easier question. Alright.